Hello and welcome to another episode of Shampoo and Booze. This is episode number 55 at shampooandbooze.com. I'm Ryan and we have Ashley with us.
Hello.
Okay, so today we are talking about how to be truthful on your listing. Now, what does that mean?
It's very important. It's basically about setting expectations so that people, when they show up to your short-term rental or your Airbnb, they're not surprised by anything.
Yes, exactly. Setting expectations is very important. You know, I've looked at multiple Airbnbs in the past 10 years where they might be like near the beach, but they definitely show pictures of the beach on their listing as if it's in their backyard.
Right.
So, you know, Jay and I stayed at a place in Virginia Beach, actually. And we were like, yeah, we're going to stay in this little, like, carriage house. And the beach is, like, right there. And we're just going to walk to the beach. And that was not the case at all. We were like, oh, we have to drive to the beach.
Classic. Yeah, that's classic. So I feel like there are two categories. There's the people that really oversell their property or their experience, but then there are also the people who kind of undersell it. So we're going to talk about both of those.
Right. So overselling is kind of what I was talking about, where they're like, the beach is nearby, but not really like specifically being like, you know, because on your photos you can have little like subtitles where you're like, just 2 miles away, you know, and look, even if you write that, people won't read it.
Yep.
Another example is like, so we stayed at a little place in Austin, Texas. It was this photo of this cute little cottage downtown. And we were like, that's awesome. And we got there and it was her garage.
Womp, womp.
Right. So, which is fine. I'm like, having a carriage house, having a guest house is great. And it was no problem, except we didn't know that until we got there.
Exactly.
You know, it would have been nice to know that beforehand. Like, this is not totally private. Like, she's going to park right in front and, like, see you every time you're, like, sitting outside.
Exactly.
Which was not a big deal, but it would be nice to have known that, you know?
So it's like there are different ways that you can set those expectations. And I feel like, you know, there's this balance between when you're selling, you don't want to say, like, it's in the garage, you know, but it's like, it's detached, you know, it's a detached garage, and this is the outside of it, and this is how far away you are from the house. Like, those kinds of things are important details for people to know.
Well, I think also some people feel like they need to oversell because they're afraid people won't rent.
Yes.
But that's not actually true.
Exactly.
You know, there are times where I'm like, no, it's fine that it's detached and it's in the backyard. Like, it's fine. I just want to know that beforehand. That's it. You know, it's like, look, here's an example. We sell used stuff on eBay all the time. And when we first started selling, we were like, we don't want to show any flaws. Well, people are buying used vintage stuff on eBay and they don't mind if there are flaws. You just have to tell them. So it's the same idea. It's just setting that expectation, and people are going to rent anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's it. It's like the more honest I feel like a post is. You know, if I'm looking at somebody's Airbnb listing and they're like, this is the deal, here's how you get to here, I feel like they're not hiding anything, and I'm not going to be surprised when I arrive.
Right.
One example I have of like setting expectations is the outside of my house is leaves something to be desired.
It's very run down.
It's very run down.
Compared to the other houses on the street that have been like beautifully painted and renovated, like, outside of your house. And I can say that I lived there for 10 years. It's the same as it was since 1985. You know?
And our house is family owned, and which means that, you know, it's like the runt of the litter, basically. It's like, it doesn't get any attention. But the inside of the house is beautiful, and it's really well taken care of, and it's a totally pleasant stay. But the outside of the house is really kind of scary. So I always grappled with, should I show pictures of the outside, or is that just not helpful? And what I came down to is I didn't have pictures of the outside because I felt like it actually was going to deter people, but I also felt like I wasn't like upselling my place by not having pictures of the outside. It's like they don't need to necessarily know what it looks like to get to my house. It's not like the only house on the street. You know, and I definitely had people show up and be like, oh, hello.
Like, this is quaint.
Exactly. But then, you know, the experience of being in the space and meeting me and kind of getting the level of hosting that I feel like I offer often offset that very quickly. But again, it's like I grappled with it because I did feel like when people showed up, they didn't actually know what to expect on the outside. And so when it was a little bit frightening, they were like, oh God, what have I gotten myself into? You know?
It's really funny because we've both kind of lived there. Like, you know, when our parents got divorced, our dad moved there and he's like a part owner of the house. So we've just seen the outside of the house forever. And we're like, oh, what's the big deal? But then if you come with an outsider's view, you're like, wow, this looks like an abandoned building from the outside.
But the upside is, and you know, we will get into this in other episodes. I would say things in the listing because I have a huge garden outside, so it has that kind of DIY feel of like there's a big garden and we're growing food and there are sunflowers, and it's like, you know, it's not a cookie cutter house. And so I would use language like DIY house, like big, you know, raised bed gardens and, you know, antique, vintage, like using words like that. Because I wanted people to know this is an old house. This isn't, you know, 1995 made, you know, lumber from Home Depot. It's like, this is an old rickety situation. Yeah. And it's very quaint. It's very, what's the word? Like classic 3-family Boston home. So if someone's looking for that, then that's what I've got, you know?
You're like, so gutter punks, welcome. Come on down. Exactly. I don't think there are any gutter punks on Airbnb.
Not quite. Not in this area.
But actually, so this is an interesting part of what we're talking about, where because, you know, you don't undersell your space, you know, like we've seen these listings before where it's a basement apartment or whatever. You're actually on the 3rd floor, but the basement apartment, all the photos are dark. You know, it looks like a cave. Like, your listing doesn't look like that to match the front of the house. You're not like, come stay in like the worst part of the neighborhood. No, you're like, look at these beautiful plants. And like you said, the garden and things like that, where you're actually saying, look how nice the inside of the house is. So it offsets, you know, that aspect of it.
Yeah. So another way that people kind of oversell their spaces is they sort of take a picture of like the flower in the garden. Like they basically take pictures that are irrelevant to their actual space. Or like, I think Jay said this to us when we were brainstorming, like, pictures of random things in the house that basically don't show anything, like this antique chair, you know. It's like, don't oversell by not showing kind of important things, like what does the room look like, what is the, you know, what's actually happening in your space, you know, as opposed to just having 3 pictures and 2 of them don't tell you anything.
Right. You have to like think of how someone's going to experience your space, just to set up, like we said, set up the expectation where you're like, this is what it will feel like when you walk in. As opposed to like, look at this cute little like teapot in the corner. You're like, no, don't show that. That's like number one. We'll probably say that a million times in this podcast, where it's like, you don't need those photos. You need the photos that people, you know, the important photos, the bedroom, the bathroom. I have seen listings where they don't show the bedroom. You're like, what? Where am I sleeping? I mean, that's definitely like
number one.
That's like underselling your space, pretty
Like,
hardcore.
you could think about it this way. It's like, number 1, where's my bed?
Right.
Number 2, where am I pooping?
Right, exactly. Like, those are the most important things, right?
Number
there.
1 and number 2.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, so it's like, and so examples of underselling your space, which are classic if you look around Airbnb in your area. Hopefully this is not you, but you want it to, I just saw a listing where people took the photos of the space at night. I was like, what is going on here? Like, you took photos of your space at night? Never do that.
It's insane. Like, I cannot tell you how many listings I see, even real estate listings.
Yeah, real estate listings too. Oh
I'm like,
God.
you're selling that house for actual dollars.
Yeah, actually.
And you're renting your house for actual dollars.
Yeah.
So, like, treat it that way,
Right.
I feel like if there were 2 possible things that people took away, it's like, take pictures during the day when you have the best light.
Right.
The best possible use of your space. It's like, just, that's like the one thing. And don't take pictures of things that aren't on your property.
Right. So, like, here's an example. We have a lake close by to one of our rentals. It's walking distance. And we specifically say the lake is walking distance. I photoshopped a little flyer that we hang up in the house, but it's also on my Airbnb listing saying, the lake is here. I even put a little map. This is like with an arrow. Like, it's so explicit. You're like, this is the lake. This is the house. You can walk. Luckily, so I don't like to just take pictures of the lake and be like, this is down the street. I spell it out. I'm like, this is down the street. You can walk there. It's a great walk, blah, blah, blah. But we did have one couple that thought the house was on the lake, that the lake was in the backyard. We don't say that. We don't show that. But still, it's a tough call where I'm like, should I even say, like, the title of our space forever was Modern Farmhouse, 1850s Farmhouse Near Lake. Near the lake.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
So it's tough. But, people want to sell the space on what's nearby. But you should, say what's nearby. Like, a lot of people... I kind of underestimate how many people read everything in the listing.
Yes, exactly.
I am not one of those people. I do not read listings. I leave that to Jay because I always forget to do it.
That is so funny. Yeah, I try and read. I especially try and read the reviews.
Yes.
Because people will be like, this is not on the lake.
Exactly. They're like, oh, so here's another example that I see. Actually, I read there's a subreddit on Reddit for Airbnb. And a lot of people, it's mostly guests, like rarely are hosts on there. It's mostly guests being like, well, no, it's probably like 75-25. But a lot of guests are like, oh, I thought this was a private house. But the way Airbnb says it, it's a private room.
I know. I have actually had that problem in my space before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why I had to, you have to be so explicit. It's like you have to say in the title, like private room and apartment or something like that. Because I feel like the rule of thumb is people don't read thoroughly at all. You're a good example of that.
I don't read the listings. I just look at the pretty pictures.
Exactly. And I try and do both, but I've had people be confused about my room situation because, in some ways, like I don't take pictures of my own bedroom because I think that's confusing. So they just see one bedroom, like that's a war story to be told another time.
Oh my God.
But I do think that, the more explicit you can be about what beds, how many, what sizes are they, what's included, guests can be in the living room space, guests have their own whole entire apartment to themselves. Like all of that language is really important. In the description and the title.
So now my question to you is, when people rent, do you send them a welcome message and are you like, this is a private room in a shared apartment? Like, do you spell that out for them a second time?
That's a good question. Not specifically. Often because I've done different iterations of just renting the queen bed in the room. And I also at one point was allowing people to have extra guests. So then, so usually if it was more than one person, I would message them right away and say, what kind of bed setup do you need? And I would say something like, I'm here this weekend, so I'm looking forward to meeting you. And I would say a little bit about like maybe what I was doing or what my schedule was. And then that sort of signaled like, oh, you're going to be in this space. Like, why would you tell me what your schedule is if you're,
Right. They're like, I don't care.
But I really, honestly, like you're saying with the person who thought the lake was in the backyard, I've only had one person really who totally basically thought my listing was some other listing. Like, I can't describe it any other way. Like, she like legitimately, I think, meant to book something else. So
it's so funny because, when they book your place and they're thinking it's a private apartment, you're like, oh no, the price would be much higher if it was, you know what I mean? You're
exactly.
Like, you think you got an entire apartment in like one of the best neighborhoods in Boston for that price?
Yeah.
Think again.
I'm like, welcome to my pajamas.
You're like, here's my cat.
I'm like, totally. Oh, can you feed my cat? No, just kidding.
BTW, cat needs feeding. Right. So those are really important things to tell people.
Exactly.
But so I think the thing that we all need to realize is like people are still going to rent your place. Just because we're not on the lake. I've heard from so many other like cabin owners in our area when we first got started. I just ignore them now. They're like, do you have a hot tub? No. Are you on the river? No. Do you have a view of the mountains? For one house we do, but the first house, no. And we were like, oh my God, no one's going to rent our place. We don't have gorgeous mountain views. We're not right on the river. We don't have a hot tub. We don't have a pool. Doesn't matter. We're 90% booked. Doesn't matter. Like, our house is beautiful. We made sure it's beautiful. We had a professional photographer. I think I've taken pictures 3 times because I've changed out furniture. So, you set the expectations. You're like, I'm not specifically like, we don't have a hot tub. But we don't have one, and it really doesn't matter because people swim at the lake and they swim in the river. So,
and if a hot tub is making or breaking their vacation situations, they're going to go somewhere else.
Exactly.
But if they want a gorgeous, country home and that's what they care about, then they're in.
Right. So I think, like we said, you're setting that expectation so you get the people who want to rent your place. And you'll find those people. It's like you said, you want the people who are like, I'm doing like a DIY situation. People are all on their own schedules here. We're all independent workers. And, that's what my house is like. It's not like a brand new, gorgeous, like high rise,
I feel like people understand overselling in that, they're going to, include things that maybe aren't exactly on their property, or they're going to, make it look much better than it potentially is, basically like over flattering what you've got. But the idea of underselling is that, I think often what people do is they just take really crappy photos of what is presumably a nice space. And so you have the feeling immediately when you look at it of like, this person doesn't really care, or they don't really know what they're doing, And so it's like, find good angles, find flattering angles. Like, don't oversell it, but definitely like make it look good, know? Make it look as good as it is. And one thing I was thinking when we were working towards this episode is, if you don't want to include something in a photo, like if you look at something and it looks like crap, or you realize it's like a major issue, then you should really consider fixing that issue. Basically, if you want to edit that thing out, you should probably get rid of it or paint it or, make sure that it's not part of a guest experience so that when they show up, they're not surprised by it.
Right. Yeah. And so the number one thing that I tell anyone looking for advice is to get professional photos taken. So in a lot of areas, Airbnb does free professional photos. I have a sneaking suspicion it's urban areas because they will not come out to our area. So Ashley did get professional photos taken because she's in Boston. So how was that experience?
It was great. I mean, what they do is they contract out to local photographers. And so it's not like they have like a staff person. It's like people take freelance jobs. And I loved it. I mean, the one thing I would suggest is, I mean, you have to do this with any professional photographer, is, your space should be beautiful and it should be clean. And, it should also be as close to what you're offering guests as possible. So don't, go over the top with staging if on a day-to-day basis, it's not actually going to look like that.
Right.
For me, I actually left some dishes in the, dish strainer, and I made the bathroom kind of look how the bathroom's going to look, and so it's not like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. It's like, oh, this is the house I'm going to be renting,
Right.
So
it feels homey. I mean, it feels like,
exactly.
I mean, especially with your space, you're like, there are clean dishes in the dish strainer because I live here and I just did it. That's not a bad touch. But like you said, your house is clean, the bed is made. It's exactly how someone would see it. And that's awesome. And look, professional photographers, they know what kind of lens to use. Like, they're not using an iPhone. They're using a DSLR digital camera with a wide lens, but it's not a wide angle lens. It's picking up the room as though your eyes are seeing it, not how your iPhone is seeing it, which is like generally pretty cropped. So Airbnb professional photographers don't come out to our area, but I hired actually both times that I did photography, wedding photographers. Now you could also look for real estate photographers. No, none of the real estate agents in my area do anything but their iPhone photos. As we were speaking before, they are like the worst photos ever.
Again, real money. People are buying houses for real money. With the crappiest pictures.
You're like, it's literally your job to take photos of a house, and it's horrible. So, but you can tell the difference when you see a real estate listing that has a professional photographer. You're like, they paid a photographer to do this. A couple of wedding photographers that I'm friends with in our area, I was just like, bring your widest lens, not a wide angle. They need to be landscape photos, not portrait, which is like vertical, like the way your iPhone or your smartphone is. You have to turn it sideways because Airbnb hates those photos. They want landscape photos. They want horizontal photos. So that is obviously a challenge for some spaces, like your bathroom. They're like, what do you mean I can't take a... I'm like, sorry. They know the best lighting for showing things. You want... One of my photographers actually took these really dark, moody photos of our space. And I was like, I need this bright and colorful. Like, I need it to feel bright because it is bright. Like, it's bright in my spaces, but I need the photos to reflect that. That's why we always like rage against like dark photos with an iPhone taken at night. You're like, this is not what the space feels like,
I'm like, I would love to rent that cave for my troll vacation.
Exactly.
So one trick that they do, the Airbnb photographers do, some people notice that Airbnb photos often all look very similar to each other, despite whatever like weather condition or sun is happening outside. And basically they take 3 different exposures so that they can have as even a picture as possible, which I have to say, I think sometimes can in itself sort of oversell a space, especially if it's like kind of a dark cave and it looks like a California sunshine apartment, you know? So there are ups and downs to using that kind of photography, but it does help.
Yeah, it absolutely helps. I mean, I also I have a DSLR camera with a wide-ish lens, and I had to retake some photos, and I did have trouble with the light where I'm like, you know, the windows are like blasting light at me, and so I would play with it. I didn't do 3 different exposures and like Photoshop it, which is what professional photographers do often. But I think my photos look pretty good. I have a combination of professional photos and my own photos. And normally I will change out photos if we changed a piece of furniture and you're like, okay, we have a better couch now. I need to show that. Which is also another thing to remember.
Yes. You know what I love about your pictures is you have drone pictures.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's funny because one of our friends who's a wedding photographer, they recently bought a drone. And we were like, oh, we really want to show how private the area is.
Yes.
And that was one of the reasons I wanted to show, like, look, there aren't. So that was me trying, you know, not to oversell it, but just try to say, look, this is like, it's quiet. There are like woods between you and the next neighbors. So yeah, a lot of photographers do have drones. So if you have like, not just an apartment, it's kind of awesome to see those.
I wouldn't drone my apartment.
You're like, that doesn't make sense. But yeah, the drone photos were really fun.
I love those. I feel like they help set context for your house.
Exactly.
And in a way that you can't get just by trying to like take it on the street.
Right, exactly. So part of it is like one of the photos, like it shows us, we are at the foothill of the Shenandoah Mountains. But it's funny because you can't see the mountains when you're sitting in our yard. So I'm like, oh, is that overselling it? So I actually moved that from the very first photo to like a couple down because I didn't want to just be like, you're in the mountains, because you are, but like you really can't see them from where you're sitting. But it's quiet and there's woods around. So that kind of, like drone photo helps. Another thing that helps set context too is for a house that has like an outdoor space. I did these little drawings of the space where I'm like, you know, this is the living room. This is the dining room. This is the porch outside. We have like at one of the houses, we have a little cabin that's the 3rd bedroom. And people were often very confused about that, where they're like, where's the other bedroom? And you're like, oh, it's like outside.
Yeah, so, it's like its own building.
Yeah, it's its own little building. So I, drew basically like it's like a very simple like blueprint where you're like, the house is here, the cabin is here. It's right next to the house, it's not very far away. So that's a way to set up expectations as well.
I like when people do that, even if they're like a little hand drawn,
Right.
It's like,
totally.
It's like, just show the space, show it for exactly what it is, as truthful as you can.
Right. Totally. Okay. That is it for the podcast this week. If you want to send us an audio file with a question or a comment, you can email us an audio file from your phone. Our email is shampooandbooze@gmail.com. We do advice services, and our service page is on shampooandbooze.com, our services, or you can check notperf.com because we call ourselves Not Perfect Design. And if you're interested in our services, check it out, email us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.